Hello viewers, here are my thoughts on the Project Motor Racing game. So I think there's quite a lot to discuss here with this game because it's about to come out, there's been a lot of promises made, and after playing it, I think it's fair to say that there's some good features, but also there's plenty wrong with it as well. And for reference here, I'm playing this on the PlayStation 5 version. I've also tested it on controller and on wheel. If you have any questions, please do ask down below. So let's start off with the physics. Probably the most important part of any racing game really. With this game, I would say it was incredibly inconsistent between cars. Some cars felt decent, some cars felt completely unplayable. Now with reference to the wheel first, I'll talk about controller later. I'll say with the classic cars, with the slower cars, it actually felt quite manageable straight away without having to change any settings. And by playable, I wouldn't say it felt incredibly detailed. I wouldn't say the force feedback is particularly good. A lot of the time you're having to drive purely on visual reference and then you kind of just react to whatever happens. So the feel through the wheel I wouldn't say is great, but in the slower cars you can place the car, you can drive it consistently and do what you want it to do. However, often when the car got faster, let's say the hypercars or the GT3 cars, it was often the case that the faster the car was or the more modern it was, the worse it felt. However, what I would say about the whole game is that I don't think in any car I truly felt a real connection to the car, what it's doing, how it's feeling, what's going on through the corner. And one of the biggest issues I have is how the car performs or how it handles when it's on the limit. So for example, you're going into a corner a little bit too fast, it starts to oversteer, you have to start counter steering, and in this situation the car felt really difficult to manage, really hard to control the car properly as soon as it goes over the limit. Almost to the point where I feel afraid to push because I know that if I have to react to something that's happening, I won't be able to do it very easily. So you have this constant sense of fear and trepidation about pushing in this game because you know that any moment that you might have is probably going to end in disaster. I was struggling to place the car exactly where I wanted. I had this session around Canadian Tire Motorsport Park in the Aston Martin GT3 and I was able to lap fairly consistently. However, at no point did I really feel as though I was putting the car exactly where I wanted. It was really difficult to place the car exactly where I wanted. And this comes down to me because of just a lack of general feel and a lack of pure detail in the way that the force feedback comes through the wheel. You don't really feel it very well. So whilst yes, a lot of the cars are drivable and you can do a decent job with them, I don't feel like the detail is really there. The ability to control the car in a fine manner at the limit is just almost impossible. Now I tested the game about 5-6 weeks ago at the Sim Racing Expo, so let's say the middle of October, and during this event they got us on some of the rigs with wheels and a controller actually. So the video you're seeing here is Jimmy testing, so I was on the same rig as him. I wasn't really able to get a good connection with the game back then either, so it's not particularly encouraging now 5-6 weeks later that the game is releasing to see that the lack of refinement on a lot of the cars is still there. So I think the main thing here with the physics is that it's quite inconsistent. Some of the cars feel a lot better than others. I don't know if they need to go through all the settings of each individual car to make sure that each one is correct. But as it stands right now, on day 1-1, so the day before release, it isn't particularly workable. It doesn't feel consistent at all. Sometimes you jump into a different car, the force feedback still feels a lot stronger than it did in the previous car, and you have to change the settings every time. So it's one of them where I think we're going to have to wait for this to be tuned in a lot better. Now for the controller. This is related to physics. Now I tested this on controller because it is on console. I'm playing this on PlayStation. There's a chase cam available, these different views. I think it's only fair that this game should work on a controller. There's probably quite a few of you out there who want to buy this game, really interested in it, but do not have a wheel set up, which is absolutely normal, and therefore you're going to be playing on controller, so you want to know how it works. Now I've got to say, this was one of the most unplayable games I think I've ever played on a controller. It was really difficult. And this is someone who has played nearly 30 years of racing games. But having many years of experience on a controller, I don't think I've ever felt so inadequate as a racing game player after trying a hypercar on this game. It was completely undrivable. Even around, let's say Interlagos, you're trying to drive around the final corner, which is an easily flat out corner in a hypercar. It wouldn't turn, then it would suddenly turn and snap, and it was impossible to recover the steering. So yeah, the hypercars, I think there's something fundamentally broken with them. This was true on the controller, but also on the wheel, they're very hard to drive as well. When it comes to the GT3 cars, something a little bit slower. This was a little bit better. It wasn't perfect by any means, but I was still having the same problems of, well, I mean, let's take a look at this clip here at the Nürburgring. Coming through the final corner here at Nürburgring, obviously you're going onto the main straight, so you want to release the steering back to straight, and you want to get on the power because you're going onto a straight. But when you get on the power, the car continues to turn because of your throttle application, so you recover the steering by turning back to the left to recover the car into a straight line. Then it over recovers and goes flying off the other way instead. So all of the normal patterns of driving in this game just did not seem to work. You want to get on the power and you want to straighten up the steering. Just didn't really seem to react in a proper way. In certain corners it felt pretty good. Going through the Schumacher S, as long as you get it right and don't drive too much over the limit, you can get through these corners okay. And it wasn't too bad on the controller. However, I think the difficulty for me was really in the slower corners, especially with direction changes, trying to go left, right, right, left. And it's that moment when the car pivots from one direction to the other, the weight changes, and it was really difficult to judge that. And again, it's when it's on the limit, really difficult to control. There are a couple of settings you can change, and I did try a couple of combinations of this. However, it didn't really seem to make much difference. I think fundamentally there's something greater than these settings that needs to be changed. So yeah, on PlayStation, on controller, I would say right now as it stands, obviously day one patch can change things, but as it stands before the launch, this was definitely not a playable game. In terms of the graphics and the track modelling, now graphics I think are always secondary to the physics. Now the physics are a bit hit and miss, I think that's fair to say. Graphics, likewise, I think the graphics look okay in certain aspects. In the replays, for example, they don't look very good at all. I think it looks really dated, really flat, really dated. However, in the garage, in the menu, looks all right. Doesn't look too bad, but I wouldn't say it looks great either. Sometimes when you're loading into a race, you've got this animation where you're going through all the cars on the grid. It looks a little bit basic, looks a little bit dated. I don't really mind that too much. However, sometimes like there was some jagged edges that you could see where the graphics or the textures weren't quite loaded properly. And likewise for the marbles, you see like kind of all over the track. It looks a little bit weird. The position looks a bit strange. What I would say is good though is the track modelling, as in the way that the tracks have the elevation change, have the trees, the barriers, the way that they're placed and positioned. I think that was pretty good. When I was driving the Nürburgring, Donington and Silverstone, which I've driven in real life, they actually do a decent job, I think, of modelling these circuits. So I think the way that they're modelled is good. It's just that the graphics are a little bit dated and flat. This was, of course, on the PlayStation version. I don't know if there's a big difference between this and the PC version, where, of course, there's a higher potential ceiling for graphics. But on PlayStation, it looked pretty muted, pretty flat to me. But it's one of them where, if the physics were to be corrected and were to work, I wouldn't really mind too much about how the game looks. The car and track lists I actually think are pretty decent. I think this is a real positive of the game. The car list has got some real gems in there. Some cars that we haven't seen in many years in a lot of racing games. I wouldn't say it's the biggest list ever, but I think it's got a very good range. I quite like the range of cars, the range of disciplines. So maybe some of the categories are a bit thin on the ground and could do with, being bolstered up a little bit. And as for the track list, I think it's pretty solid. It's a decent list. Not awful, but at the same time not incredible. I think it's just solid. I wouldn't put in much more than that. In terms of the AI, can you have a good race against the AI? I mean, notwithstanding the physics problems, let's forget about that for a second. There are a lot of games now where when you're racing against AI, it doesn't necessarily feel like you're racing against robots. They have a little bit of a human tendencies and stuff like that, but in this game they definitely feel a little bit flat. They do feel like robots. They can be randomly aggressive as well. I had this moment here at Zolder circuit. I think the potential is there to have a good, solid battle against them. I was testing the different strengths of AI up to 100. I seemed to find my level around maybe 80 to 85. And at that point, the races were okay, but nothing special. And then we have the penalty system, and this is not really a huge factor in this game, but I just wanted to note it anyway. And I would say it's definitely quite strict when it comes to track limits. Now, a lot of the time, I was overcorrecting going off the track because I couldn't handle the car because it was so difficult to drive. And then I would get slapped with a 2-second penalty. There were times as well where I was getting pushed wide and still getting a 2-second penalty. So there's definitely some scope there for that to be toned down a little bit. When it comes to the UI, this is not obviously a hugely important factor in a racing game. I think most of us just want the cars to work and to be able to have a good race. However, there were some kind of oversights here which make me really feel like the game was released too soon. So for example, going into one of the menus for the factory driver challenges, if you wanted to go down through all the different challenges available, it would load the leaderboard every time. So if you wanted to go down to the one at the bottom, it took forever to get there. Also, you couldn't view the full leaderboard until you had set a time. Sometimes the names weren't loading as well properly until you'd set a time. And also when you are lapping and setting lap times, you go over the finish line and a big notice would kind of pop up for half a second, which is extremely distracting. So yeah, these are a couple of things that should easily have been ironed out. So my overall verdict for this game is it's probably best to wait until it's made a lot more consistent between all of the cars and just basically fixed. On controller, it's really just not very playable at all. So if that's what you were looking for, I honestly can't recommend it to you. If you're playing primarily on a wheel, then I think there is potential. I think there's still a chance you could enjoy this game, but only under very certain circumstances. Now, there is word of a day one patch that is meant to solve all these issues, which, if I'm being completely honest, I don't completely believe that, especially when I was at the Expo 6 weeks ago playing the game and haven't seen a huge amount of improvement since what I played there. It seems too much of a coincidence that the game will suddenly be fixed just on release day. I don't know if that's completely true. I guess we will see. And I do think there's a lesson here, which is to not always believe the hype too much, because Rennsport came out a couple of weeks ago and it's a little bit disappointing, I think it's fair to say. And I think many of us turned our attention towards this game, and in many ways I believed what a lot of the developers were saying, and I think a lot of them have a huge passion for this game. They want to make it work. However, that isn't necessarily the case or necessarily what has happened. But my number one recommendation is to just wait a little bit, be more patient, and just wait for this game to potentially turn out to be a much better one, because right now I can't recommend it. And on that note, I really, 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 really want to like this game. I really want more racing games to come out and to be good and to challenge the games that are already out there. So hopefully, by the time day one patch comes out, everything I've said is actually redundant and the game is actually perfect. However, we'll have to see on that. If you have any thoughts, any questions, please do ask down below. See you next time, guys. Goodbye.